A heartbroken Russian general spent £10 million trying to win back an empress who had already moved on. The story begins in a temple. In a Hindu temple on an island in southern India, in the middle of a war, where a French soldier was about to do something sneaky. The Sri Ranganathaswamy Temple at Srirangam sits on 156 acres of land on an island wrapped by two arms of the Cauvery River, ringed by 7 concentric enclosures, each one taller and more elaborate than the last, with gopurams, the great carved gateway towers, rising like stone mountains above the surrounding plains. For over 1,000 years, pilgrims have walked through its gates. Kings have knelt inside it. Armies have fought over it. The reclining idol of Lord Ranganatha, an avatar of Vishnu, lies at the center of the innermost sanctum, in a chamber that only Brahmin priests are permitted to enter, attended by daily rituals and surrounded by offerings from the faithful across the subcontinent. The deity's eyes were set with diamonds. One of them, mined from the kola fields near the Krishna River in what was then the Golconda Kingdom, was a stone of uncommon size. Roughly the shape of half a chicken's egg. A faint bluish-green tint, the kind that catches candlelight and holds it. 189.62 carats. When the light hit it right, it looked like something alive, which, as far as the temple priests were concerned, it was. It was the eye of a god. The year was 1747. The Carnatic Wars were tearing through southern India, the French under Dupleix on one side, the British East India Company on the other, with the Nawab of Chanda Sahib Court between them. A French grenadier, whose name history has swallowed entirely, deserted his post somewhere near Pondicherry. Desertion during wartime carried a death sentence in almost any army. So he needed to disappear. He took up residence near Srirangam and converted to Hinduism. He even learned the rituals. He observed the rules. He came to the temple gates day after day, worshipped with apparent devotion, and over a period of years, some accounts say many years, he moved closer and closer to the inner enclosures. The temple had strict rules about access. Outsiders could enter only the outermost courts. Hindus could go further, to the entrance of the sanctum. Only priests could cross the final threshold. Somehow, the Frenchman was eventually appointed as a guardian of the innermost shrine. The priests trusted him. The god looked down at him with those diamond eyes every day. One night, he pried the stone from the idol's eye socket and walked out. He left the other eye intact. Whatever his reasoning, he fled to Madras, where he found the protection of the British Army and, shortly after, a buyer. He sold the stone to a British ship captain for £2,000. The captain, who understood what he had, sold it in London for £12,000. From London it moved east again, passing through the hands of Persian merchants, Armenian traders, and European dealers across a journey of 2 decades. The priests of Srirangam, it is said, laid a curse on whoever owned the stone. The god would have his revenge, they declared. Whoever possessed the diamond would know suffering to the end of their days. Grigory Grigorievich Orlov came from a family that had made a religion out of fearlessness. His grandfather, nicknamed Oral, the Eagle, first made a name for himself while awaiting execution alongside other mutinous soldiers under Peter the Great. Standing in line at the block, watching heads fall, he kicked aside a comrade's severed head and remarked that if this was his place, he wanted more room. Peter the Great, who admired nerve above almost everything, pardoned him on the spot. From that man descended 5 sons, all of them soldiers, all of them enormous, all of them the kind of men who walked into rooms and rearranged the atmosphere. Grigory was the second of the 5 Orlov brothers, and by most accounts the most magnetic. He stood well over 6 feet, with a physique built by years of military campaigns and a face that, according to contemporary witnesses, made women forget what they had been about to say. He fought in the 7 Years' War and was wounded 3 times at the Battle of Zorndorf. He refused to leave the field after any of them. He returned to St. Petersburg looking for something worth his attention. He found Catherine. She was then still Princess Sophia von Holtzerbst, a minor German noble who had been shipped to Russia as a teenager to marry the heir to the Russian throne. The heir, Peter, was, depending on which historian you read, emotionally unstable, politically incapable, and entirely indifferent to his wife. Catherine spent years at the Russian court being ignored by her husband while quietly educating herself, learning Russian, studying philosophy, building relationships, and watching how power moved. By the time Grigory Orlov met her, she had already decided she was meant to rule. Their affair began while she was still empress consort. It was dangerous. Openly conducting a relationship with a guards officer while married to the Emperor of Russia carried consequences, but Catherine had always understood that the greater danger was inaction. They had a son together, born in secret and smuggled from the palace. When she became pregnant a second time, she wore elaborate dress structures to hide it for months. In 1762, Grigory and his brothers organized the coup that ended Peter III's reign and placed Catherine on the throne. This was a substantial undertaking. Organizing a palace coup in Imperial Russia required coordinating the loyalty of the Guards regiments, timing the seizure of key buildings, managing the delicate politics of the Senate and the Church, and doing all of it with every mouth sealed. The Orlov brothers pulled it off with precision few would have predicted. Peter III was arrested and died in captivity within days, officially of hemorrhoidal colic. Catherine became Empress of all Russia. Grigory Orlov stood beside her as her most visible favorite, wielding enormous informal power for the better part of a decade. He was given estates, titles, and military commands. He suppressed the plague riots in Moscow in 1771. He fought at the front during the First Russo-Turkish War. He was, measured by any real standard, one of the most powerful men in Russia because the Empress loved him. And then she stopped. Catherine the Great's private life has attracted more speculation, more myth, and more outright fiction than almost any other ruler in European history. What the documents confirm, and what matters here, is this: she operated on her own terms entirely. She took lovers as she chose, elevated them to positions of influence for as long as they held her interest, and when interest faded, pensioned them off with palaces and estates and titles and moved forward. It was a system of sharp clarity, if little warmth. The men who entered it knew the rules. Or they believed they did. In 1772, enemies at court informed Catherine that Grigory had seduced his 13-year-old relative. The truth of this is disputed. What followed is on the record. Catherine installed a young guards officer named Alexander Vasilchikov as her new favorite. Orlov, who had been away on a diplomatic mission to negotiate peace with the Ottomans, returned to St. Petersburg to find his rooms occupied by someone else. He kept his titles, his estates, his position in the hierarchy of the court. He was received when he visited. Catherine was cordial, even generous. She gave him gifts. But the relationship was finished, and everyone in St. Petersburg understood this before he did. There was exile for those who threatened her. Punishment for those who betrayed her. For Orlov, she offered something colder: total indifference. He was simply made irrelevant, which for a man of his temperament was considerably worse than either. Grigory Orlov was built for battle, for decisive action, for problems that could be solved by force or courage or loyalty. Being replaced by a younger man, politely and publicly, with his hands tied and the battlefield empty, was a situation his entire character had been designed to avoid. He started looking for a diamond. The stone had been moving through the merchant networks of Europe and Asia for over 20 years by this point. It passed through Persian hands, Armenian hands, Dutch hands, each transaction pushing the price higher and the provenance murkier. By the early 1770s it had arrived in Amsterdam in the possession of an Armenian millionaire named Shafraz. Some sources call him Persian, some call him a merchant named Safraz. History refuses to agree on his name but agrees he had the diamond and wanted to sell it. He had already tried to sell it to Catherine directly. A letter dated January 2, 1776 records that a Persian merchant arrived at the Russian court with the stone and made his pitch to the empress. She looked at it, declared it too expensive, and sent him away. The merchant, undeterred, went to Amsterdam and kept looking. This is where the story splits into two versions, and both of them illuminate something true about Catherine. In the first version, a Persian merchant, reading in Orlov the face of a man in love and therefore a man in pain and therefore a man susceptible to an ambitious sales pitch, approached him with the stone and told him that this diamond, This specific stone, this exact size and this exact history was the one gift that could rebuild what he had lost with Catherine. Olaf, thinking with the part of his brain that had been most reliably unreliable throughout his life, bought it. He paid a reported 400,000 Dutch florins, the equivalent of roughly £90,000 sterling at the time, somewhere close to £10 million in modern value, though gem historians dispute the conversion figures. He also agreed to an annuity of £4,000 for life. He pushed hard on the price for the same amount of time it takes to blink. He wanted the diamond and he wanted Catherine, and those two facts together made him a ruinous negotiator. In the second version, supported by a document between Olaf and a financier named Lazarev, and which several historians find more credible, Catherine herself had been after the stone all along. She had seen it, wanted it, and understood that an empress who haggles with a merchant over gemstones like a customer at a bazaar loses something harder to replace than the purchase price. So she sent Olaf as her agent. He bought it on her behalf. The diamond was always going to be hers. His name ended up on it as a thank you. The second version, if accurate, is one of the colder maneuvers in European royal history. The woman sends her heartbroken ex-lover to spend a small fortune buying her a jewel she had already decided she wanted, then rewards him with a palace and his name on the stone, and allows him to believe, for the rest of his life, that it was a romantic gesture on his part. Knowing Catherine, it was probably the second version. Olaf presented the diamond to Catherine on her name day, the feast day of St. Catherine, a date of celebration at the Russian court. The gesture had been carefully staged. He arrived, the stone was produced, and Catherine was visibly struck. The Olaf is a stone that resists understatement. At 189.62 carats, with roughly 180 facets cut in the old Indian rose style, it catches light from every direction simultaneously. It sits in the hand with the peculiar weight of something that seems too large to be real. She accepted the diamond. She rewarded Olaf with generosity. The Marble Palace in St. Petersburg, a building that took 15 years to construct and stands today, was the central gift, along with various other estates, gifts of money and titles. Measured by any objective standard, this was an astonishing return on his investment. He spent the equivalent of several million modern pounds on a stone and received a palace. Financially, he came out ahead. Catherine kept her distance. She named the diamond after him. She had her court jeweller, Troitinsky, design an imperial scepter built around the stone, a burnished shaft in 3 sections, ringed with 8 bands of brilliant cut diamonds, topped by the Olaf itself sitting dome side outward, with a double-headed eagle above it bearing the arms of Russia. The scepter was completed in 1784. It was used at every Russian coronation ceremony thereafter. The stone Olaf had bought to win back a woman became the central symbol of her sovereign power. If this strikes you as an elegant form of rejection, that is because it was. Grigory Orlov left Russia in 1775. He travelled through Europe, spending his money, enjoying his titles, trying to fill the space that had opened up in his life where Catherine used to be. In 1777, he married his young cousin, Ekaterina Zinoviev. She was beloved by him in a way that the court found touching and his earlier life had done little to predict. She contracted tuberculosis and died in Lausanne in 1782, aged 22. The grief destroyed something in him that had apparently survived everything else, the battles, the coup, the rejection, the years of trying to reassemble a life. He suffered what contemporaries described as a complete mental collapse. He returned to Russia. He died the following year, in 1783, on his estate. He was 59 years old. The temple priests might have nodded. Catherine herself lived until 1796. She went through several more favourites after Orlov, most famously Grigory Potemkin, the man some historians believe she secretly married, who built cities in her name and managed her southern empire and loved her in the complicated, volcanic way that two enormously powerful people occasionally manage. She died at 67, in her palace, having ruled Russia for 34 years. She left the country larger, better administered, and more feared internationally than she found it. There is a footnote to the diamond story that demands inclusion. In 1812, when Napoleon's Grande Army marched on Moscow, the Russian court evacuated the crown jewels ahead of the French advance. The Orloff diamond, along with the rest of the imperial treasury, was hidden in a priest's tomb somewhere in the Russian interior. The French took Moscow and burned large portions of it, but the tomb escaped them entirely. When they retreated, which they did, catastrophically, through the Russian winter, the stone came back to St. Petersburg. A stolen eye from a southern Indian god, hidden in a Russian priest's grave while the French marched past outside. History has produced few stranger itineraries than the one this stone has travelled. The Orloff diamond sits today in the Diamond Fund at the Moscow Kremlin, mounted in the imperial scepter exactly as Catherine's jeweller set it in 1784. It has been formally weighed once in recent memory. Around 1913, the then curator of the crown jewels was conducting an inspection when the stone accidentally fell from the scepter. He caught it, weighed it, and later reported that it came to approximately 190 carats. The exact figure went unrecorded at the time. The measurement-based estimate of 189.62 carats is the figure that has been used ever since.